for real talk that challenges and inspires. Subscribe to Real Talk with Christopher Lewis on YouTube now. Captivating interviews, compelling stories, and meaningful content await. Don't miss out. Subscribe now. Be part of our vibrant community. Hit that subscribe button. Stay informed with new episodes. Subscribe and be inspired. Real Talk with Christopher Lewis. Subscribe now and let's make a difference together.
Welcome back to Real Talk with Christopher Lewis. This is the fourth podcast number 4, and I'm proud to have as my guest this evening, Tanisha Brown-Williams. Welcome, Tanisha.
Thank you, Christopher.
And our topic of discussion is where goes tourism in Trinidad and Tobago. So before we go into the topic, Tanisha, you could perhaps introduce yourself to the audience and your role in tourism.
Yeah.
Give some insights.
Sure. So I have about a little over 20 years of experience, professional and academic experience in tourism. I'm currently an assistant lecturer at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, and a researcher, as you rightfully listed. So I've done research in the sector for both Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. But I'm not just an academic. I call myself a pracademic. Because while I do have a keen interest and passion for teaching and researching and so forth, I've also kept connected to the industry. So I've been an Airbnb host, for example, for the last...
So you know the ins and outs.
Yes, 8 years. And also the Airbnb host community leader for Airbnb for Trinidad and Tobago. I'm also involved with a local NGO, Green TNT. And we are implementing an eco certification for hotels and restaurants and so forth, primarily in Tobago and other Caribbean islands. So I have a foot in both the academics as well as the industry.
Okay, very good. So you're straddling both worlds. So it's not a question of staying in a cloistered room and doing research, but going out there, meeting the practitioners and sharing that knowledge from them and to them. So a two-way kind of situation. So while you were introducing yourself, I put up a slide which you had shared with me, which shows the tourism trajectory since 1957. So the big line, the yellow line, is basically the tourist arrivals, which is a key indicator that we often use in the industry. And you see there has been some growth, but not spectacular, from about 200,000 to below 500,000. And that's, I'm talking a span of 1957 to 2017. We've gone through all kinds of iterations, the Tourist Board in 1957, Tourism Development Authority in 1959. The Ministry of Tourism became a separate ministry in 2003. We had TDC replacing TITCO 2004 to 2005. The Tobago did their own thing with the THA and the Division of Tourism in 2005. We had the TDC being replaced by Tourism Trinidad in 2017. But despite all of that transition and structural changes from an organizational level, not much seems to have changed on the core data, which is the arrivals data and other factors which we will talk about. Why is that? What is the data telling us or not telling us?
Yeah, so before we get to that, I just want, for the benefit of your audience, to help us to understand that, because oftentimes I hear Trinidad in particular does not have a tourism industry. Because we're not the quintessential Caribbean island with white sand beaches, blue water, etc. Tobago is closer to that, right? So you hear oftentimes from Trinidadians that we don't have a tourism industry because we don't have a fantastic beach. But I just want us to understand that tourism is not just about leisure. In fact, the definition of tourism is it says the main definition speaks to movement. And it is movement outside of your usual place of work and where you live more than 24 hours, for more than 24 hours, for less than a year, for multiple purposes, whether it be for medical purposes, whether it be for educational purposes, whether it be for business.
Yeah.
So the person that is leaving a Caribbean island and coming to Trinidad for a medical procedure
Yes.
is a tourist.
Yes.
Under the definition of tourism. All right. So I just want the audience to be abundantly clear that Trinidad and Tobago has a very vibrant tourism product or products.
Because in terms of tourist arrivals, from the data that I've read, 90% roughly comes to Trinidad.
Right.
10% to Tobago. So in terms of the main driver of tourism seems to be tourism, Trinidad.
So I don't know what is the current data for 2022 into 2023, but previously it was actually 95% of arrivals to Trinidad and 5% to Tobago. And that may shock some persons, but this is what the data has said.
As we're talking about data, and as a researcher, do we have a problem with tourism data at present?
Yes, I would say yes. And let me clarify my yes in that there isn't enough academic research or industrial research around tourism in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
I just want to share something. In 2015, I was on a fact-finding mission with some other colleagues to the Bahamas.
Yes.
And this experience would never leave me. The research manager at that time for the Ministry of Tourism at the Bahamas, she made it abundantly clear that the tourism minister at that time, did not make any final decision concerning a project, an activity, whatever it would have been, without consulting her.
Yes.
So I was like, wow, this actually happens, because in theory, you learn that you ought not to make a decision without consulting the relevant data and research.
Yes.
Here it is that somebody at that point in time was doing that. And we all know the Bahamas is quite profitable in terms of their tourism sector. So with regards to Trinidad and Tobago, so not enough is being done, but I do want to say, for example, UE St. Augustine, we have recognized this. And over the last 3 years, we have increased our research output. So for example, one of the hot topics in Trinidad and Tobago would be Airbnb.
Yes.
And the whole sharing economy, right?
Yes.
And the growth of the sharing economy. And in 2022, we published a piece of research on the impact of Airbnb on the traditional accommodation sector. And that research would have sort of indicated that the traditional accommodation sector, i.e. the large international hotels, the local hotels, the bed and breakfast facilities, that they were not averse to Airbnb, right? They were very much, open to it, but the issue was in terms of standing on a level playing field concerning standards and regulations and taxation and all of that. So the point I'm trying to make is that unless we dig deep into certain issues that surround tourism, and tourism is very complex, right? It's very fragmented. There are very many moving parts that have to work together to deliver an experience to visitors. Unless we dig deep with research, then oftentimes we can't understand this beast, for want of a better word, that we have to manage effectively.
So as you mentioned Airbnb, the point I'd like to stress here that it's ordinary citizens who are benefiting from those types of arrangements in terms of visitors from abroad coming and staying in your home or your apartment, and so the revenue is coming to you. So there is benefit. There is, of course, the concerns about standards, the concerns about taxation, and so to make sure that the visitor doesn't have a negative experience because of a bad Airbnb and tarnish the whole country as a result.
Right. So destination image is also another concern that was raised in that research.
Now, as you say, image, I remember previous employee, previous government as well. There was a big study on the national brand and so on for Trinidad and Tobago, and the government changed and it went nowhere.
Okay.
So to me, that is part of the problem, in that why come to Trinidad and Tobago? if I'm a tourist in, let's say, Sweden or Japan,
Right.
I'm going outside the traditional places. Why should I come to Trinidad and Tobago? What's the brand? What's the experience I can anticipate coming to Trinidad and Tobago as opposed to going to Jamaica or Bahamas, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are many reasons why anybody should come to Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, and the first thing that jumps out to everybody, even when I travel, is carnival, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, culture is way up there.
Yes.
But I mean, at the end of the day, as I said before, Trinidad in particular is not that quintessential Caribbean destination as we know Caribbean destinations. We have a very diverse offering in terms of who we are as a people.
Yes.
Right? We have a vibe, and we have this Trinbagonian vibe.
Yes.
Which is then supplemented or supported by our food. I mean, Trinbagonian food is a big thing, right? I mean, like, I think it was the other day, the Canadian Prime Minister was into doubles, right? And that was Trudeau. He was literally, just gulping down on doubles. And I think the president of Eurocharm in Trinidad, when he came to Trinidad, when he assumed that office, he said, hey, we should be exporting doubles because this thing is really good. So food is one of our main, or culinary tourism, so one of our main offerings, coupled with that whole liming vibe. I remember when I worked at the Tourism Authority, we had intent to implement something called Lime with a Local. Right? Because lime, and that actually came out of what we saw in the Bahamas, because the Bahamas has a version of that called the People to People program, right? And this is where, when you're coming into the country, you can actually apply to spend a half day with a Bahamian that has the same common interest like yourself, right? So if you're a school teacher, you can hook up with a Bahamian school teacher, and you can just have that whole Bahamian outlook of what it is to be a school teacher. So our version of that was, you can hook up with a Trinbagonian to lime like a Trinbagonian, because liming culture is a culture, and that's a culture that is very unique to us. So there are many reasons. I mean, flora and fauna for Trinidad and Tobago. Understanding that Tobago was recently declared a UNESCO Man in the Biosphere. That the main ridge was designated that, and the whole eco vibe and so forth. So there are multiple reasons why anybody should come to Trinidad and Tobago.
So it's a question of putting it all together into one cohesive product that you can sell.
Correct.
So which brings me to the next question. By the way, you see scrolling at the bottom of your screen, the number that you can call, text, I'm sorry, 379-9994. So if you have any particular questions you'd like to be addressed by us, please text 379-9994.
Before you move on, I just wanted to share, because it's important. I think if people know, people have an appreciation of what's happening, right? Back to the whole point of data and research. Recently, I assumed the position of chairman of this group called the Caribbean Tourism Researchers Network, right, which is part of the International Tourism Studies Association. The idea of this network is really to bring researchers that have an interest in Caribbean tourism, whether you are a Caribbean national or not, together to increase research for the entire region. And we recently signed an MOU with the Caribbean Tourism Organization to literally advance research in the region. So that's good news, right? And there are going to be implications for Trinidad and Tobago, because whatever best practices emanate from research could be used to apply in the Trinidad and Tobago context. The other point I want to make is Marla Dukaran, in her Caribbean Economic Report of March this year, raised some eyebrows, right? So, and this supports the claim that we don't have enough data. So I'm just gonna read what I have here very briefly. she positioned that the data for the total impact of tourism on our economies, from jobs, net foreign exchange earnings, net fiscal revenue, was not available or is not available. Right? She said most of the balance of payments data are not adequately disaggregated to show tourism's imports, even though there is a direct, obviously there's a direct impact, but she's saying that the balance of payment data is not properly disaggregated. So that's a concern, right? That if this data is not available, what she is asking is, what is the true value of tourism to Caribbean economies? Is it pro-progress or is it pro-poverty?
Is it a net benefit?
Is it a net benefit?
Yes.
Right? And in the absence of data, and she wasn't saying that it is or it isn't, what she's saying is that we do not have the data to come to that conclusion.
I would just like to stress on that point because it's something I practice in my own business environments that I've been in, is that you make informed decisions based on the reliable data.
Right.
So when you make a decision off the cuff, off the fly, because you think something will work or this is a good idea or so and so said it, so therefore it is good, that's a mess.
Yeah.
And when it comes to tourism, especially investments in tourism, is millions of dollars. So tourism is not about opening a little pub down the road. Sometimes you have to spend millions of dollars. It impacts the environment.
Yeah.
It impacts the infrastructure, the employment variables which you have to take into account, and not only for the construction, but the long-term benefits that could be derived. Somebody has to be tracking that.
And on that note,
yes,
I don't know if you follow Afro Raymond's.
I know him.
Yeah, his call, I think all the way back to 2017 to the government to provide insight into the ROI for state-owned hotels in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
So he has been asking for this data to make comparison, to ascertain if public investments decisions are for the interest and the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Or that's for sure.
And I don't think, sometimes we think requests of those nature is combative.
Yes.
And, it's highly political or so forth. But
I think it's just a culture where I'm in position of power, so I'm not to be questioned.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that, in a population that is a lot more educated.
Yes, exactly. That the internet.
Yes, you will have people asking those probing questions. And I don't think as public officials we ought to be afraid if there isn't anything. Of course, you're trying
to antagonism just because the question is asked.
We need to understand that there are intelligent people in our society who can add value even by asking the hard questions, and that we can all progress together.
And actually, the hard questions is what leads to the correct answers or the correct strategies. Because if I'm going down a path and someone asks me a hard question, Chris, should you really be doing that? What's the benefit? And maybe something I didn't think of.
Yeah.
I may stop, I may rethink, and then I may choose a different path that makes more sense. So the person asking the question is doing you a favor.
Yeah, if we go back to the sandal situation, I know that might be an uncomfortable conversation for few, right? But I think of a different approach. I don't think there were some people who are against the idea, but I think if there was a different approach that was taken, there would have been more buy-in. And when you go through and you sift through the complaints, or the noise, as it was sometimes referred to, the thing that people were asking for was data.
And transparency.
And transparency. They were asking, if the economic impact of tourism jobs created would outweigh the tax concessions that were going to be offered to Sandals. And remember, at that same time, there was a revelation by the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, of how much Sandals was, in terms of concessions, they were actually, I have it here, they were actually taking, according to him, they were charging a sales tax and then retaining 65% of the sales tax in the business, right? So at that time, obviously hearing that startling news, people would be concerned about, well, so what would be the arrangement here? And really, how will it impact us in terms of economic benefits and return on investment?
And what you're pointing to, Tanisha, is there needs to be, with these types of investments, an economic model. We're looking at the pluses, we're looking at the minuses, we're looking at the short term, we're looking at the long term. This is the economic model to prove or not prove the viability of this investment or this particular project. It's transparent, it's made known to everyone, all parties concerned, and then we could have a consensus on agreement. So it's a different way of doing business, but I think it's the only way, because these projects affect people's lives.
Right. And if you know, keep your eyes on the Caribbean scene, because Edmund Bartlett, who I believe is a superstar of a tourism minister in the region, he's highly regarded in the international arena.
And
he's Jamaican, so he's Jamaican minister of tourism. And I came across an article where he said, going forward, his ministry is going to conduct an economic assessment to identify the fiscal, socio-economic, environmental impacts of developing more hotels and adding to their room stock. So maybe somebody is listening to Magna Tukara, and maybe Minister Bartlett is paving the way for some change. Because this is not a problem that is only applicable to Trinidad and Tobago. It is a Caribbean-wide issue in terms of the lack of data and not being able to fully ascertain what is that true impact.
And making decisions based on who knows what. Which leads me into the second question that I had raised. Do we really care as a country whether tourism does well or does not? I have my personal view, which no data to support it, that we did wrong from way back when somebody said master data. And people are equating service with servitude. But these same people, when they travel abroad to New York or London or so, they expect the highest levels of service. So it's almost a conflict, something, it doesn't make sense to me, because your servitude in Trinidad if you perform a function, but when you go to Miami, it's good service. How do you rationalize that, or is that a factor?
Well, it's understanding, and I will name the person who said master data, and I think for the benefit of our younger viewers. So of course, when you track the history and development of tourism in Trinidad, Dr. Williams established this intent for national development in a particular way towards oil and gas, and he did it through the phase Massaday done, right? So whereas many other Caribbean islands post-independence decided to pursue tourism and agriculture as their economic sectors, he made a decision that we were not going to continue colonialization in the form of tourism, because he viewed tourism as the black serving the whites, and it was a perpetuation of that, right? So there's a book called Caribbean Tourism by Holder. And I do encourage, because this is documented information, right? People could read. And I just want to say at this point that, tourism is a respected discipline like any other respected discipline, right? The same way that people go to school and they study to be doctors, you need to study tourism. Tourism is a business, it's a science. Right? So Holder documented actually about 5 or 6 countries and their development with tourism, and Trinidad and Tobago was one of those countries. So he would have said clearly that tourism was discarded as a panacea for economic development. And so coming out of that, we all know we pursued oil and gas, and I think we should be familiar in terms of where we're at this point. However, at the graph that you showed, it did not it didn't stop tourism from happening. So it's not that there wasn't any interest, because as we saw in 1957, there was the Tourism Act, the Hotel Development Act of 1963, and then the first Tourism Authority was formed in 1989.
Yes.
So it's not to say that he had no interest, it's just that it was not a priority.
It wasn't taboo.
Right. And why? Because it was a perpetuation of colonization for him.
Yes.
And so we are still struggling with that mindset. A mindset that was laid by our first Prime Minister.
And how do we get over that?
I don't have the response for that. But what I
have a suggestion. I think we need the population to understand it's business. And it's good business for you and me and for the ordinary citizen. So it's not about serving somebody in a servile manner, but it's about a business opportunity that could be profitable for you as a citizen.
That has been tried multiple times in terms of awareness campaigns. Tourism is our thing, we think, right? Let me tell you something, Christopher. I think the best way we would continue to win Trinidadians, Trinidadians over with tourism. You see the Airbnb model?
Correct.
That has not been investigated, looked at in the way that it ought to. You said it earlier. This Airbnb model puts dollars, US dollars, into the pockets of average citizens.
Correct.
Right?
It changes the dynamic.
Yeah, so let me tell you that Trinidad and Tobago has close to by now I would think it's closer to 1,000 listings, right? Most of them are in Tobago. I can't tell you the percentage because Airbnb holds data very near to their chest, right? It's not easily accessed. But the last time, I think about a year ago, I was told it was 800 plus listings.
Yeah.
I have been a host for, as I told you, more than 8 years. I've encountered various persons, right? We're talking about high professionals who use Airbnb, doctors, lawyers, sports persons, eco travelers, backpackers, etc. And one of the main reasons why they would stay at an Airbnb is because they want this local, authentic experience. Yeah. And that is something that Trinidadians know how to do well. We know how to entertain
naturally.
Yeah. So we're natural entertainers. I don't like the word entertainers, but we are naturally hospitable.
We know how to make people feel comfortable.
Right. And we know how to draw people in.
Yes.
Right? That's one of our key selling points.
Yes.
And the Airbnb model allows the Trinidadian to see the importance of the traveler coming into their home space, getting money into their pockets, and being able to interact and to share that Trinidadian culture.
Yes.
That's the way how we should be winning people over. The mindset of tourism is about servitude. Because you see, there's a direct benefit that they're experiencing in this interaction.
Exactly. And if I could share just a small episode that I had when, at the time, as I said, I also did an Airbnb, and I had visitors come in for Carnival from Jamaica originally, but living in Miami. But they had everything concierged out for them in terms of pet tickets and costumes were delivered to the house and thing. And one of the days, one of the young ladies said they wanted to go to the supermarket and where it is. And my first reaction was just to point them. It was like a 5-minute walk, 10-minute walk. Then I studied, you know what? I have a responsibility. Their experience of the country will be flavored by what may happen or may not happen to them in that walk. So I jumped in my car and said, come, I will drop you. Waited for them, wanted to go pharmacy, sure, no problem, no charge or anything like that. But I had a responsibility as an ambassador of the country. And I saw that personally. It wasn't no government edict to tell me that, but these people's lives are literally in your hands.
Because you're here, right? I mean, once a guest staying at their property, here, they were and got shot at or something.
Yeah. Something happened.
So by extension, in terms of that interaction, you would care. You take care of your visitor.
Correct.
You would see the words in the visitor.
Yes.
Let me share this story. I mean, I share this story all the time.
Go ahead.
With with people. A client that I still have, he's an 80-something-year-old man.
Okay.
Right? I started this company called with two other persons in 2017 called Share Home Caribbean.
Okay.
And it was really geared towards helping people who wanted to set up their homes for Airbnb to show them how to, because there's an approach, right?
Yes.
So this elderly man, unfortunate circumstance, his wife passed away, and her dream was to have this bed and breakfast. They have 7 rooms. Some of the rooms are en suite, and they wanted to create this experience.
Yes.
So to honor her memory, he came to us. He said, "Hey, I want to do this." Helped him set up. Right? This is in 2017. Mr. P, as I would refer to him, remember he's 80-something.
Yes.
Mr. P has had hundreds of visitors.
Yes.
This is a shared house, so you don't have your own kitchen, and you have common areas, and you have your private.
Yeah.
These are people, when they leave, I mean, I'm talking about people from Madagascar who came, a whole group from Madagascar, people from Australia. They fall in love with Mr. P.
Yes.
Because they think they're like, oh my gosh, he's such a vibe.
Yes.
He has a bar.
Yes.
So when he gets close, if he gets close to some of his guests, he would literally take them in his truck and carry them down to his bar in Mover.
Yes.
Right? And they drink beers and they interact with the locals. I mean, that is tourism. That is tourism the Trinbagonian way.
Correct.
Last night I was on a call with a student. I have to share this. And the student is from Barbados. And we are talking about the experiences in Barbados. There's still, based on what he said, there's still an issue of segregation, right? The non-tourists, the tourists and the residents, and there are certain things that they are not able to access and so forth.
Who's they?
The Asian persons, right? The national citizens. Anyhow, this is the experience. He's saying, but I remember when I came, he was part of his rugby team, and he came for a competition here. He said, I remember when we came to Trinidad, we sat down on Brian Lara Promenade in front of somebody's bar, eating doubles and drinking beers. He said, I thinking, but this don't happen.
Yes.
In terms of the number of persons, and the kind of persons, right?
Yes.
And the location, because it wasn't a fancy restaurant. He said, but listen, that is one of the memories that he holds on in terms of how tourism could be so grassroots and provide that grassroots experience. And I tell you, that is what Trinbagonians do well, perhaps even above every other Caribbean island, might I say.
Because it's not put on, it's a natural part of their culture.
Natural.
So on that point, I want to ask the question, do you think we are underperforming based on the available data? As a country, are we underperforming in the whole tourism sector?
I would say,
and what?
I would say yes, but I let me share some additional data with you, right? So we have.
Don't forget to send in your questions. 3799994.
Right. So I do have the arrival, and you did show it on the screen, the arrival data from 1984 to 2019 on this diagram I have here.
Yes.
As you said, we have not gone past at least at max 465,000 visitors in the past 2 decades. So we fluctuate between 375,000 to 465,000.
Yes.
Of course, we know what happened with COVID. Trinidad and Tobago
affected everybody.
Yeah, Trinidad and Tobago had one of the longest border closures in the Caribbean, or the longest border closure. And as it is now in 2022, 2023, we still have not recovered to the 2019 arrival figure.
Yes.
Right? So we are struggling, and it has been decades of going up and down, up and down. But I have to tell you that from 2015 all the way down to 2018, we did have a consistent decline in tourist arrivals.
Yes.
So that was that decline is quite apparent, and that was before COVID. So we can't necessarily pin anything on COVID, right? So overall, the growth of tourism in Trinidad and Tobago has been slow compared to other Caribbean islands. On average, an average growth and decline rate of 5% in international arrivals, as I said, within the last 4 decades. And this information is really startling. And this is 2020 information, that we have actually captured less than 2% of the 27 million visitors that come to the region.
Yes. So this brings me to my point, and the whole question of underperformance is not that people have turned away from the Caribbean. It's not that people have said, "Oh, this is a bad area to go to for hurricanes or whatever reason, crime or whatever." They're still coming. They're still going to Jamaica. They're still going to the Bahamas, to St. Vincent and St. Lucia, but they're just not coming in the numbers that we anticipate or we expect we can hold in Trinidad and Tobago.
Right. There must be a reason why,
yes.
right?
So, as we were discussing earlier, we believe there's the cultural issue has to be addressed. I also believe that if there's real leadership from the very top of the country to say, well, hey, tourism matters, it is important, it's a good thing, it's a beneficial thing. If that message is sent clearly from the very top, I believe that would go a long way in filtering to everybody else.
And I do have some data. I have always promised myself that as a tourism professional, I would not say things or even encourage people to say things without backing it up with data, right?
Yes.
And I always point people to the Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index report. I mean, anybody is free to Google it. This is 100, I think it's 140 countries. I stand to be corrected there. But every 2 years they do this report, right? Okay. So the last report that I want to reference is in 2019. They would have done one in 2021. It was done a little differently for obvious reasons, because of COVID and because of how things played out. But in 2019, Trinidad and Tobago ranked 87. Out of I'll give you the total now, it's 140 countries.
Yes.
So we were ranked 87th in terms of competitiveness.
Yes.
On this index. And in 2021, we did move up a bit to 85. So that's some good news. But we're still in the 80s, right? Yeah. Now, this report measures competitiveness across 14 indicators.
Yes.
And one of those indicators looks at the prioritization of travel and tourism.
Yes.
And because tourism in the Caribbean is public sector led, right? Obviously, they're going to measure the commitment of the government in terms of funds, in terms of the government's ability to attract investment, also in terms of attracting tourists in with regards to national tourism campaigns, marketing campaigns, and whatnot. So based on that, if I were to I'm just letting you know that Trinidad and Tobago in that 2019 report they scored at 4.0, right? Yeah. While, for example, Jamaica would have scored at 6.2.
Yes.
Right. Looking at some other, Haiti has had its issues, as we know, but Haiti scored at 3.6.
So we had Haiti.
And we had 4.0, right? And then when we looked in terms of the ranking for that particular indicator, we ranked 107 as it relates to the prioritization of travel and tourism out of the 140. So when you ask me, are we making this?
Yes.
Are we giving it the best efforts, and what is needed to move the industry along? We need really a government who is prioritizing travel and tourism.
Yes.
That's a simple answer.
So me related to that, it's not about ticking boxes. It's not about setting up a dedicated agency, allocating millions in a budget speech and saying, well, yes, we focus on tourism and we spending money. That's not it. It's about developing that national brand, having that focus, having that unique selling proposition, having the conversations with the population as to what tourism means to us as a country, and going forward in a sort of concerted manner, as opposed to just ticking a box to say, well, we set up the tourism Trinidad, that's it. We allocate $400 million, that's it.
But I want to disagree with you. It's also that, I mean, institutional arrangements for tourism development are critical. So you need the tourism authority, you need executing arms of the government, you need the government to do its part. But as we said at the start, it's a complex, fragmented industry.
Of moving parts.
So that it can't just be two parts moving and then the 20 other thousand parts not being brought into the conversation, or it's not, there's no effort to join, right? And as we're on the point of funding, I do have information from 2013 to 2017 in terms of the allocation over that period. Right? And starting from 2013 to 2017, the allocation for tourism, in particular destination marketing and promotion, fell by 69%.
Whoa.
So, Trinbagonians love to say, well, how come we don't see ads? Right? Like how we see it for Jamaica, we see it for St. Lucia. Well, ads cost money, right?
Correct.
And sometimes big money. And the fact is, a government's policy position. So we can ascertain, so beyond the words that are written in a policy document that we will pursue X, Y, and Z. So on that note, Vision 2030 has 4 mentions of tourism. Four times. And it speaks to ecotourism, right? So if I were to analyze that document, I can see, and this is being very biased. This is not because, you don't like this administration, but let's look at what is the policy position. And if I go through your Vision 2030 document and you only mention tourism 4 times, then I know that it is not a priority. And then if I look at data like this, that from 2013 to 2017, there was a decline in the allocation of funds for marketing and promotion by 69%. And trust me, I believe that even 2018, 2019, well, we know 2020, what would have happened. I still believe, and I stand to be corrected by anybody on the call who may have that data, I still want to believe that there has been a downward trend in allocation for tourism.
And the problem I have, from my point as unrelated to data, is I have no idea what the targets are. So if someone came to me and I researching for this podcast, I scrolled the internet, checked all sorts of sources, and I got sometimes conflicting information. But if someone asks me, well, how many tourist arrivals does Trinidad and Tobago expect in 2023? I don't know what that number is. How much for Trinidad, how much for Tobago? I can't tell you.
You mean the forecast?
Yes, the forecast. In other words, what's the target? Because you have all this tourism infrastructure, but what are they working towards? What targets do they have to hit to say, well, yes, we're doing a good job? Because good job doesn't mean anything. But I hit certain targets. The tourist spend on average is X number of US dollars, the hotel occupancy is X. What are my targets for 2023, 2024, 2025? What is my brand? I don't know. Simple questions that I'm just asking off the cuff.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen data coming out of Tourism Trinidad and the Tobago Tourism Agency, right? If you peruse their LinkedIn page and so forth, within recent time, I think Tourism Trinidad has been doing some infographics to show that, right? So the last one I saw, they would have categorized arrivals, and the top purpose of traveling to Trinidad was visiting friends and relatives. So the information.
That's a passive thing.
So I understand. I want to believe that there are targets. Again, it's a matter of it not perhaps being communicated to the public to understand what are we working towards as a destination.
So another not saying the question may be topic too challenging, but we invite you again to text your questions. If we really want to attract investments in tourism-related projects, is there something? I mean, I looked at case studies in India, what they're doing, for example, for Invest India. Could we do things a little differently to attract that investor? into tourism-related projects?
Yes, I think we would all agree that bureaucracy,
Yes.
the amount of time that we have to wait for approvals.
Yes.
I mean, even us as citizens encountered, right? In terms of getting approval for wanting to build a home and so forth.
Yes.
And it gets even worse for an investor. So going back to that travel and tourism competitiveness report, there is an indicator called enabling environment.
Yes.
Again, how does the environment facilitate, or is it attract? Does it attract investors to the country and so forth? There's also another one called travel tourism policy and enabling conditions, which I think would also straddle the investment point. And in 2019, again, we were ranked at 75.
Yes.
Right? And under the travel and tourism policy and enabling conditions, we were ranked at 92.
Yes.
So that's a clear indication that we need to do much better.
Yes.
So, I mean, I can turn the question back to you because, I mean, you were heading Invest TT and some of the issues that you would have seen with regards to the slow response.
The bureaucracy is a major factor.
Right.
And I think what an investor looks for is speed. Now, even if you tell the investor no, that's not a problem if you tell them it within a reasonable period of time, 6 months, a year. But when you drag out an investor for 4 years and 5 years, and then tell them no at the end of that period, there's an opportunity cost because that investment that is being reserved for Trinidad and Tobago could be spent elsewhere and making money. Yeah, so, I think we need to understand that how the investor thinks and what are the costs that might be involved. And if we're attracting someone, we're not the only Caribbean island in the Caribbean Sea.
Right.
There are several others we're competing. So how best can we be competitive? And we have to be serious, not just talk it out in a nice speech.
Yeah.
So one of the things you mentioned, you made several references to the COVID-19. With the global pandemic, we know the climate change issues, the rising sea levels, the changing weather patterns, the strengths of hurricanes. We're getting more category 5 and 4 hurricanes than we used to get, say, 10 years ago. So one of the interesting articles you sent me before was the core question of future-proofing the tourism in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'd like you to share some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So it's a bit of research that we did at UWI in terms of future proofing, and we looked at small island developing states, given all that you would have just discussed, right? One of the main things that we were able to ascertain is the need not just to build infrastructure.
Yes.
So to future proof doesn't mean that you need to only safeguard infrastructure against natural disasters.
Yes.
But what we found more, even because we looked at different small island developing states across different regions.
Yes.
And one of the things that stood out is the whole notion of building a resilient people.
Yes, I see some comments here. Go ahead, I'm listening to you.
Yeah, it's about building a resilient people who are able to survive and adapt and innovate.
Yes.
And COVID, I believe, proved that to us, right?
Yes.
Because, for example, food drop.
Yes.
And teacher ride share.
Correct.
And all of these innovative activities would have emerged because of a crisis.
Yes.
Now, do we wait for a crisis
to happen
for that to happen?
Yes.
So while infrastructural development for tourism is important, all of the research now post-COVID is talking about how do you build capacity in your citizens to be able to think differently and to act differently if a crisis comes or before a crisis. So that's how you future-proof. You focus on changing the dependency mindset, especially in our Caribbean context, and by facilitating innovative thinking.
Yes. And for a small island state like Trinidad and Tobago, innovative thinking is sometimes seen as a negative. As breaking a mold, breaking a norm, and as a threat. So that is a major challenge.
Yeah. The second point I want to make is by way of an example.
Yes.
So my colleague and I, Amanda Charles, out of the CTO, and myself, we wrote a chapter on Dominica,
Yes.
an ecotourism, a resilient ecotourism destination, perspectives after Hurricane Maria.
Yes.
Right. And of course, we know what happened with Hurricane Maria and Dominica in 2017. One of the things that we found coming out of the research, Dominica was able to recover their tourism arrivals in such a short space of time.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what they did?
Yeah.
They leveraged on the love that those travelers to Dominica in the past, right? There's a certain theory that speaks about loyal travelers, or those who are waverers, so they're not as loyal and whatnot. And what they did was literally to pull on the heartstrings of those loyal travelers who repeatedly came to Dominica for time. And sometimes we think these things are far-fetched, but when I was in the Bahamas, we were told at that time in 2015, more than 60% of the arrivals from the Bahamas were repeat visitors. It wasn't even new travelers. 60-something% of your arrivals are people coming for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? And that's what you want as a destination. So Dominica would have reached out to these people who were loyal and engaged them in voluntourism. Invited them to the country to come and rebuild Dominica. And so when we talk about future proofing, we can talk from the supply side at the destination, but we also have to be able, as a tourism destination, to make sure you have captivated the hearts and minds of travelers who would come back and spend their dollars at the destination and to help in recovery.
One of the points you touched on there in that discourse was the whole question of training, because I know in Trinidad we closed down the hotel school. That was based in Shagaramas. I believe there's an institute in Tobago. But is it enough? To me, that's just a symptom of being not serious about this industry, because this industry is so specialized, people coming from all over the world, different interests and different needs that to be fulfilled. If we're serious about it, we would be investing in our human resources.
So there has been a huge gaping hole left with the closure of the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Hospitality Institute. I know their intentions to establish something. I'm not privy to.
But that's after how many years?
Well, the school closed in 2020. It would have been November of 2020. So definitely. Now, on that note, and this is a plug for UWI, of course, I'm just putting on my UWI hat. UWI offers a BSc in International Tourism Management. We don't offer the hospitality side, but if anyone is interested in pursuing tourism, we have a program at the BSc level and as well as the MSc level. Having said that, we are now undertaking, I told you, we're now churning out research, right? We undertook a review of what is necessary for the industry right now as per greening skills. So to have the audience become aware that sustainable tourism post-COVID has increased, or the demand for sustainable travel. So I think we can even relate it, because when we were not allowed to go outside, suddenly there was this intense appreciation for being outside and being in nature, and we saw it with people going up past the mounts, and then the amount of persons, and they had to restrict it a bit, right? And I'm sure that Chagram has encountered a surge of visitors. So in the same way, you now have this global appetite for sustainable travel. So what we decided to do was conduct some research across 3 territories: the Caribbean, Southern Germany, and Southern Africa, to see what are some of those green skills that are now needed by tourism graduates. Right? So while we're talking about, yes, we need to introduce something, we have to also be mindful that whatever we introduce doesn't revert to what we know before but captures the skills that the new realities of the tourism sector. And that research is showing that the industry is calling for graduates with at least some sort of green knowledge, and not just in knowledge, but some, people who could come out there and implement green practices in hotels and restaurants.
And also communicate that to the guests.
Yes.
So when the guest asks a question, what's your carbon footprint? You're not watching the guest like
what is carbon? What is carbon footprint?
That's something that's knowledge to be shared that everyone should know. So on that note,
do you have a question? Do you have any questions?
No, just the comments that I've been posting. But I didn't see the questions coming as yet. But final comment was about an effective roadmap to follow. I know you had some thoughts on that. To realize the full potential of tourism, where do we go from where we are in September 2023?
So, yes, I shared a short answer with you before we started, which is I don't know.
Yes.
And this is why I decided to do my PhD in governance, looking at tourism governance to be more specific. Because I think I neglected to say that in that research where we reviewed the development or the history of tourism in Trinidad and Tobago, three things stood out in particular, right? Which would have been the position that that Dr. Williams took. So that would have impacted us. Our pursuit, of course, of the energy sector for economic growth. And the last thing was the complexity of managing a dual destination.
Yes.
2 islands, and trying to have a proper tourism system in place. So I decided, coming out of the whole TDC that was closed down in 2017, to try to investigate to understand the dynamics between multi-island states. And how can these multi-island states that have oftentimes subcultures, right? And different economic sectors. How can those multi-island states work together to progress effectively? Because when you look at St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, when you look at us, for example, we have had issues as a small multi-island state to progress well in tourism. When you look at St. Kitts and Nevis, it looks a little differently because they have progressed in terms of in terms of their arrivals, in terms
so
of
let me ask you a hard question. Does this dual destination theory make any sense? Is there any data to support that we are better off?
So that's what I'm investigating.
Yes.
Right? What is Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis doing that we could do?
Yes.
Right? What systems are in place? Now there are a lot of variables, right? Because culture, ethnic groups, there's a lot at play and a lot of dynamics that happen or exist between multi-islands. So my research is to examine tourism governance in those states and then to come up with a potential framework for how those multi-islands could work together effectively. So all I'm saying is that I don't have
the data
because it's ongoing research.
No problem.
If you welcome me back, I can come and share my PhD research.
But I have my 2 cents. I think it's a failure from what I could see because I have no evidence to suggest it's a success.
Our approach to
this dual destination. Because if I think you say Antigua and Barbuda, I think it's a Nevis. I'm thinking Hawaii. Hawaii has so many main islands. Bahamas.
700.
People say they're going to Grand Bahama. They say they're going to Bahamas.
Yes, they.
And where you staying? Grand Bahama. But first thing, I'm going to Bahamas. I'm going to Hawaii. Where you staying? Oh, I'm staying on the island of Maui, or I'm staying on the island of so and so, but I'm going to Hawaii. And the challenge, again, no data. As you say, you like data supported arguments. So I have absolutely no zero data. But the problem I have intrinsic for Trinidad and Tobago is that the dependence of Tobago's success on Trinidad. So to me, both sides have to be talking to each other because I don't have the airlift being Tobago. I'm Tobago. I don't have that airlift that I could manage my own affairs and everything is coming straight into the island and I have the hotel capacity and everything else and I have the number of taxi drivers and the leisure services and so I could independently operate and set my targets and be successful reasonably based on my business model. My business model, if I'm Tobago, depends heavily on Trinidad.
Right.
So I'm not seeing the logic of separating those two entities to say, well, you Trinidad, you do your own thing, you Tobago, you do your own thing. But I agree that there needs to be a distinction in terms of the branding of why you're coming to Tobago as opposed to Trinidad. And another place I worked, I won't call the name, but they were selling cars and they had different brands. And they found that there was success, but more success with the sale of the lesser brands when they separated the sales teams. Because when the sales team sold all brands, they focus on what their customer to be top sellers.
Right.
And the second tier brands suffered as a result. But when you had the dedicated sales team for the second tier brands, they were more successful overall. So it's what I'm suggesting, the solution probably lies in some kind of hybrid. But in the end, you're coming to one place, you're coming to Trinidad and Tobago. But I'm really interested in Tobago. And how do we focus that sales effort and that promotion effort for Tobago distinctly from Trinidad, but in a way that they are talking to each other? So, because we pretend that, oh, Tobago is there and Trinidad is there, but the overseas visitors does not see that because they're landing in Piaco. And then they have to find a way to Tobago. And there's that seamless coordination and this sort of thing. So to me, it's living in a pretend world that, Tobago could do its own thing, Trinidad could do its own thing and separate. So you're going to one international conference and there are two different booths in two different locations. I don't think I'll see that for Hawaii or Bahamas. And I don't know how that makes sense to some people. It just makes total nonsense to me. But you need to, but I'm agreeing that there needs to be that distinctive profiling of the different entities, but in a way that is collaborative as opposed to competitive.
Right.
So that's my viewpoint.
So when I'm finished with my PhD research,
yes,
I will come back again and share.
Sure, I will come back.
My in-depth insights with you, and I think one may argue that when the two entities were set up, has there been sufficient time to judge performance?
Yes.
So that's but that's another conversation that is connected to this, which is of course COVID interrupted.
Correct.
So perhaps one may argue we need to give enough time to ascertain if the model works or not. Right? And I'm all for that. But again, we come back to where we've started. We can't just think things off the top of our heads.
No, and figure out, okay, this is my idea, so therefore it's a good idea.
Yeah, so this is the beauty of research, and oftentimes public officials see research as being onerous.
Yes.
But if you have a research perspective, both from the academic side and the industry side, it really helps you to have a better grasp. The Bible says that we perish for lack of knowledge.
Yes.
This is something that is very practical. If you don't believe the Bible, then look at the practicality of it. If you don't have knowledge, then you will not progress. That's essentially what it's saying.
Yeah. So actually, I think you shouldn't have any regrets about your PhD topic because I think we really need to get that information, that detailed research, and I hope, as we mentioned before in these discussions, that people accept it for what it is. It's just a question of how you of collecting data and presenting that data. It's not about injecting Tanisha's personal opinions. So she disagrees with me, therefore she's a bad person. You know, how do you make that connection? It's just about what is the data telling me, and maybe what are the alternative approaches that we could achieve to arrive at a different conclusion, and determining what are those conclusions, what is our destination.
Yeah, let's have meaningful discussions.
Yeah.
We really need to mature as a society.
Yes.
Past looking everything as combative.
Yes.
And not supporting a political party.
Yeah.
It's really, really horrible.
Yeah.
Because you lose intellectual value.
Correct.
You lose people who can contribute profoundly and help you to progress. But if we continue to live in this very narrow mindset, that you cannot even receive constructive criticism because it's taken personally and it's taken as an attack, then we're not going anywhere. Why are we educating all these young people?
Yes.
Right? And it's not to be yes man and yes woman.
Yeah.
It's to challenge the status quo.
Correct.
And it's to do exactly, we spoke about future proofing. If we want to future proof Trinidad and Tobago for any sector,
yes,
we need to have young people coming up who will challenge the status.
Who's thinking totally differently that we were thinking yesterday.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to listen to them, analyze, does it make sense, does it not make sense? Why do you say what you say? Because it's conflicting with what I know for 20 years, it don't matter. But maybe you have the valid reason for you saying what you say.
Yeah.
And once we have that open mind, that's where progress is really made. So
hopefully I know it's very idealistic.
Yes.
But let's hope that our conversation today,
yes,
help to educate and even spark some sort of young, innovative mind.
Yes.
To solve the issues that we raised.
Okay, so thank you again. I've been chatting this afternoon, very lively discussion with Tanisha Brown-Williams, noted tourism researcher and expert, and we asked the question, where goes tourism in Trinidad and Tobago? I hope we address some of the answers to that question, and I look forward to continuation of this podcast with Tanisha at a date soon to be announced. So thank you and have a good evening.